call for the future. It is the last and best part of the training when, after spending an hour explaining how to take and record customer calls, I say, nearly in a whisper, one more thing. You can create a phone call for the future. I pause and repeat the phrase, willing the seed of possibility to travel through this online platform and plant itself in the listener's ears. I have often thought, through these hours of corporate icebreakers, pointing and clicking in meeting rooms that aren't anything I would have called rooms 2 years ago, how beautiful it would be to pull up my calendar and, instead of trainings, doctor's appointments, and the minutia that eats our days, schedule phone calls for the future. Next Tuesday, a long-lost friend. Wednesday, a publication mesmerized by my manuscript. Thursday, an agent. Friday, a new love interest. Saturday, an apology for something I'd feared was my fault. And if we can schedule phone calls for the future, why not phone calls from the past? On Monday, my mother, 2 years dead, tells me what it's like to finally be sober. On Wednesday, my great-grandmother sings me the Lost Mouse song she reserved for winter mornings at her house, when I crawled in her lap before first light. On Friday, the mama friend who fought cancer hard, only to die a year later, says, "It's okay here. You're going to like it, but no hurry. It'll keep." On Sunday, every Sunday, my brother, who died on a Sunday, calls to make sure I've made peace with our least favorite day of the week. He asks, on repeat, "You okay? You sure?" Then, randomly, on a day when you didn't think you scheduled anything, past or future, your phone rings. On the end of the line, you hear the panting of your dog, 17 years dead, the familiar yip and whine that means something you never hear in these remote workrooms. I love you. Stop working. Let's play.
All right, welcome to another edition, I guess, of Poets in Montana. Today's poet guest is Melissa Stephenson. Welcome, Melissa.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
I'm thrilled to have you, and I love that poem.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, what a great idea. And you know, knowing you, because you, like me, often write out of your own existence. Was that an actual job you had at one time?
Oh, it's the job I have now. So thank you to the company for supporting my creative interests.
At least you got a poem out of it, right?
Yeah, after a decade of hustling as a full-time freelance creative person, whatever we are, you know, creative gig economy workers.
Right.
When the pandemic hit, like many people, some of my gigs, like the writing collaborative, things like that, I couldn't do them.
Right.
So I applied for unemployment, knowing there was this CARES Act unemployment, but there was a glitch in that one of my gigs was working as a writing tutor for the University of Montana, and I made like $50 over the limit on the W-2, and I had to go through normal unemployment, which was less money and had the caveat that I had to apply for multiple jobs per week, which I think some people ignored, but I don't know. I wanted to show them that I was doing the legitimate thing.
Right.
And I got one of those jobs, much to my partial dismay at the time.
Which was kind of a telemarketing kind of a situation?
It is. Well, the nice thing is it's fully remote, and since I have kids and pets and all that, I can do it from home. It's kind of more in line with technical writing for a company, but I write training materials and deliver remote trainings, and so that's all over online platforms. And when I heard about, realized I was training people on how to schedule a phone call for the future, that was that was a little gem I had to run with.
Yeah, oh God, yeah, dude, that's priceless.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then the past, and then, and of course the dog. I love that. The dog reminds me of, dogs are everywhere. Dogs are just, it reminds me of an old poem of mine, actually, which is just so cool because dogs are lovers.
They are.
So, I mean, we should say, cover a little bit of ground. How did you, when did you land here? When did you get to Montana?
I first came out to Montana for college, so would have been 1993, and I was 18 years old and heard it was a beautiful place and there were good writers here.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so did you take a BA in creative writing?
Yep.
Oh, cool.
Yep.
Right. I guess I kind of forgot about that because I know you wound up going to Austin for an M.F.A.
So then I was gone for a decade after graduating here and working 2 to 3 jobs in order to get by in Missoula. Even then, around 2000 or so,
Right.
Stayed for another few years doing that, and then realized I was probably going to have to go elsewhere and get some skills.
Right.
I don't know how an M.F.A. in creative writing really translates into like the sort of job skills I thought I was going to acquire, but that's the path that opened up. So I ended up in the Austin area for about a decade, and then came back with 2 young kids in spring of 2011.
Right.
I've been here since.
Cool. And so you studied poetry in Austin? You study everything?
My MFA's in fiction, actually.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah.
Because that would make sense. You're quite accomplished at the art of memoir writing.
Is there a parallel here you're drawing between fiction and memoir, if I'm just really reading deep?
Well, it's like bigger stuff.
Yeah,
I think
long
of poems
form.
as like, they're so short, and then,
Yeah.
longer form.
Yeah.
Organized writing,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. The idea of writing a novel or a memoir just like blows my mind.
Yeah.
But
It did me as well.
Your memoir Driven was, I thought, incredibly successful.
Thank you.
And did that translate itself into a second opportunity at a book?
I'd love to tell you, oh yes, I sold some book on proposal, and my agent calls me every day, and I'm a really big deal. But, really, I'm just back to the same place I was before. Having a book is helpful in many ways. But I've worked on several different projects. I have several different books sitting around that I just haven't really focused enough on my own, kind of like the collection of poems.
Right.
Maybe there's a little hesitancy, or I'm not sure what's done when. A book like Driven was easier once I was under contract with it, but the rest of the writing was just as difficult as everything I'm doing now, writing it completely on my own, having the endurance to commit to something that might be a failure.
Right.
In terms of publishing. And then once you have other people on deck with you, you've got deadlines, you've got structure, it's easier to see it through to the finish line. I have a second memoir right now that's at the nebulous stage where I continue to revise and circle back, and I'm just not ready to share it with my agent or anything yet, but I'm
Right.
getting there.
You're getting close.
Yeah.
Yeah, and who knows what? Yeah, it's like I thought Driven was just like a home run, and so why wasn't it? I was talking to another friend of mine who was actually on this program, James J., who I went to graduate school with, was up here for a visit with his family, and we were talking, and I remember him saying that he was at somewhere, he was talking to an agent or a book publishing person with not exactly, M.F.A. or Harcourt, but a bigger book publishing outfit. And he was saying that they were telling him that most books are just, if they sell 1,000 copies, they're lucky.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, I had no idea that there was that much of a failure rate in the publishing business. I mean, poetry is a different story at all. We know nobody buys poetry, but in the book market, right? The real
just
book
other
market.
poets. We buy each other's books and support each other.
Exactly.
You know Julie Stephenson, an agent
Yes,
with Massey and
yes.
McQuilkin, who lives here locally, which is a really cool thing for the community and writers here. she described it really well once in a Facebook post, what it's like making a book and what it's like maybe for her on the agent side, which is just like us, she finds a manuscript she loves and thinks, oh, everybody is going to love this. This is wonderful. What a beautiful book. But she used the analogy of sea turtles. And each book is a tiny little sea turtle egg, and they lay hundreds, thousands, I don't know, of eggs in hopes that out of all of that, one actual turtle will, survive for years and years out of that batch. And publishing is much the same. They have their marketing department and their calculations and all of that, but at the end of the day, it's hard work, the intersection of hard work and luck,
Yeah, I guess. And it kind of gives you an idea of just how many books are being made. Well, you think of the number of people in the world, I guess. And because you think of the libraries alone, you'd sell quite a few books, but I guess not if there's that many out there fighting for attention.
Shelf space,
Yeah, right. Well, is there another poem that we want to throw out there? I mean, I like to stuff as many poems as possible in this thing before we rattle on too long. But
do you want to hear the first poem I wrote after not writing poems for 15 years?
That would be great.
Okay. This will be a little bit from the
What
way
year
back.
was that written?
As I was driving back to Montana with my 2 little kids in 2011, which is interesting that I came out here as a poet. I studied poetry in high school because I went to, an art kid high school where we didn't have...
Interlochen, is that?
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So we didn't have football, but we had visiting writers like Rick Bass and Pam Houston and Galway Cannell, and we had workshops and readings and concerts.
Wow.
So I came out to Montana very much as a poet, and near the end of my time here discovered creative nonfiction and what it's like to write something longer and more narrative. And then when I went for my M.F.A. in 2000, I don't think creative nonfiction programs were that widespread then. It was still very much...
Just getting started about that time, yeah.
And so I wanted to experiment more with long form. I think I was inspired by some advice from the writer Jim Harrison, who had told me something about in the lifelong poem chase, it's good to learn to write prose. That the poem chase would be there, but that prose is how he had made a living. I can't say the same for myself, but it might be good if I experimented with prose. So when I left Missoula and went for my M.F.A., I just completely stopped writing poems. And then on the road trip back here, which was from the Midwest, a long trip with 2 little kids, this poem just came to me out of nowhere. And it's the first poem I wrote after at least 15 years, I think.
All right.
Road trip. We're aimed west across the country for the first time in a decade, returning to our new old home. My husband drives 90 with headphones on, bobbing a knee in time to a phantom beat. He is always miles beyond us. Riding shotgun, I can't read a paragraph without the older child questioning the Earth's rotation, the sun on fire, that place we go when we die, or not. Look at the birds, he says, the pad of his index finger imprinting on the car window. Geese, I say, migrating. I mean to read a book on the way things work, like birds and engines and childhood. The girl kicks the back of my seat. Bird, she says, her face gravitating to the pair of geese traversing the blank Wisconsin sky. Last time we drove west, I still ate breakfast at noon and paraded my not yet husband around downtown bars, believing love and faith constant as the light from stars, alive with the secret that the world tailor-made vintage dresses and intricate miracles for me. 20 years spent only to surface with an empty mouth, unable to explain birds flying across the sky. For a better climate, yes. Because they have wings, yes. But the details escape me. The difference between a duck and a goose, the day of the week, the reason we've inhabited 4 states in 9 months. Sometimes even my name on the lips of my children stuns me, sure as the Big Bang, black holes, the mute expanse of the universe. It's another grand accident delivered in subtle variations. Mama, mommy, mom. I glance back at the only miracles I've ever named and distribute plastic snack bags. They break their hand-holding to take them while the geese soar unreasonably high over road signs, big box stores, grass, and asphalt. Their two small necks lead fat bodies in flight, wings flapping like giant mistakes, and I want to say stop. That looks so hard. I mean, the struggle.
Nice. I was wondering, when you first started writing poetry, probably back in high school and in your BA situation, were you the same kind of poet? You're such of a strong narrative voice, story-driven poet, which makes a perfect leap to the memoir, I guess, in a way, right? I mean, because they come out of your life, most of these poems.
Yeah.
Was it always that way?
Yes.
Okay. Which made it easier for you to think, maybe I should be writing fiction and nonfiction and...
I had someone tell me that when I was a senior in high school. I forget what the program is, but there was some program that, if you're at a school like Interlochen, they're good about telling you the things to apply for. You have a larger map of schools to go to and places to apply for because you see everybody around you doing it. Right. So there were possibilities around me that I never would have seen if I had stayed in my hometown. Mm-hmm. And one of the things the teachers were really good about encouraging, I think it was only seniors could apply for it. It was some national arts program, and it was something about like being a presidential scholar in the arts. I think that was the program. Mm-hmm. And I had placed or done well in that program, so I got to go to Miami, Florida, which is a huge deal. I'd completely forgotten this experience, by the way, until now. And we spent like a few days down there in a hotel with the other, high school writers. Right. And we worked with these older mentor writers. I'm sure if I remembered who they were, I could Google them and find out. But there was one guy who, maybe he was a prose writer, but the older writers read in all genres, and he was like, hey, you're a pretty good poet, but I can't wait to read your first novel. Right. And it's because I wrote such narrative poems.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I've had people shout that stuff at me.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's what I love about your work.
But the thing of it is that I'm not really a fiction or that kind of a large format writer. I don't think I am. I've tried writing short stories, but I can write a short story, but it's a lot of work and the attention to writing and organizing a large piece. How long was Driven? How many pages?
Good question. Somewhere just under shy of 300. I know word count was somewhere around 75 or so, and at one point it had been up to 95, and you pull it back. I think prose can be harder when you start as a poet because we're used to looking at, anywhere from a quarter of a page to maybe 2 pages and being able to spend lots of time, if we want, fretting over exactly the right words and the tones and textures and connotation, and to maintain that kind of focus and attention over a sprawling work is really exhausting.
Yeah, mentally it's almost paralyzing.
Yeah.
To me, to think about.
Yeah, and that's it. I think at some point you have to kind of not let go of that level of control and perfection consciously, but trust that you're doing it, that you have those skills inherently, and kind of just let it rip a little bit.
Right. It's kind of, I always referred to myself as being lazy because I didn't want to go back to that kind of, looking at something again in terms of a rewrite sort of situation. But at the same time, that attention that you spend on one poem and whatnot shows that you aren't exactly lazy. You're willing to dig in and roll your sleeves up for a while.
Yeah.
But the whole the whole big picture thing is, yeah, it's a complication in my
Yeah.
mind. But you've handled it really well. Up to this point in time.
Thanks. I don't know. I hope so. But
Yeah.
I mean, that's a blessing and a curse. I love to write poems, and I love to write essays, and I love to write memoirs, and I love to write short stories, and I have a novel-length work,
you've got 2 children, and you just got married.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's all the other things that take up a life, right?
4 dogs and a cat, just throw that in there, too.
There you go,
Yeah.
my
The
God.
daily work of having a household and a life, and
Yeah.
it's a lot.
Yeah, it is. Well, how about something else? How about another poem?
Yeah. Let me see. It's a little fall poem here. I tend to write, I don't know if you notice that you have seasons. I write a lot of poems in the fall, apparently, I've discovered.
I do too. Well, when's your birthday?
October?
Yes, yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that has maybe. I always thought it had something to do with it for
Yeah.
some reason. Not that I freak out over my birthday or anything.
Are
but
you October?
Yeah,
What's
I'm a fall guy.
What's
yeah.
your birth date?
2.
Okay, 17th, fellow Libra.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought everybody loved that time of year. It feels like,
Yeah,
It's
a
my
great,
favorite.
Yeah, October's a great month.
yeah,
Good month to be born.
yes, I agree. Equinox. Inconsolable bear dreams all night. Raw potato resurrected beef stew. The children grow in bedrooms below you, in spite of you. A pair of brown-eyed volunteer flowers. The problem with you is you like drunk people better than normal people because drunks feel like home. Your mother's fingernails raking against scalp. Chardonnay, the scent of sleep. Too much beer soured the stew. Tradition, though, to cook fall equinox away as the skies gather their gray skirts, darken and spill. And something in you stirs, adding a little of this, some of that. Today the children snicker, say it smells like poop soup. They eat and grow, leaving piles of the unacceptables, onions, bay leaf, celery, at the bottoms of their bowls. What would a grizzly anyway want with you? All tendon and sinew, bone lovely and practice and lonesome. Still you wake, indisputable, with the feel of fur and claw on your hands, the wild scent of half-dead forest around you, and, famished, stretch your limbs alive, broth boiling, rescued before coffee.
Nice.
That's a trick I picked up once when I cooked beef stew with some beer in it, just one
Yeah.
beer for the part of
Right.
the broth, and over salted. Put in a piece of raw potato. It's supposed to soak up a little of the.
Of the salt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That I mean, we have known each other for a little while, but as soon as I started reading your work, I noticed that I felt a kinship towards, your voice and what you write about and everything. And of course, booze is probably a big part of that, I suppose. You had alcohol in your family. Are you? What's your background? Are you your ethnic background?
Oh.
Just out of
Yeah.
curiosity, it was something I read in one of the poems too about
Yeah.
that rattled on. That kind of a thing is sort of an Irish expression. Is that in your background?
Yeah. So we have one of those family lines that was a little tattered by the Great Depression. Family members ran. It's hard to trace, but on one side, Irish would be the most traceable line,
Right.
and Norwegians and Danish folks on
Yeah.
the other side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, I don't know about the Danes, but I knew Cheryl Nothy tells me that Norwegians are notorious drunks.
Yeah.
And of course we know the Irish. And today is St. Patrick's Day,
Yes.
so Sláinte.
Yes.
But it is it does definitely play a role in your upbringing as a child. I mean, it drives you into yourself more than probably other people might experience, I think. Possibly. I don't know if that's true or not.
Did you grow up around big drinkers?
My dad was a drunk,
Yeah, I thought so. I mean, I thought it was in your family.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I only recently heard, maybe 2 years ago when I was visiting Indiana, and, you know, I still drink, but not much. I like beer in small quantities, but I'm celiac disease, which also is a very, in the Irish lineage. And so now that I can't have that, it's kind of like, sure, I might have a cider or something, but whatever, I can pass.
Right.
But I was visiting my family in Indiana. We were at a restaurant on my birthday, and I was combing over their beers and ordered a beer, and they were like, "Oh, you're just like your great-grandma Mabel." They called her Mabel Black Label, and she was the Norwegian, their grandmother, who drank some Black Label beer, and I got a kick out of that.
Mabel Black Label.
Yeah, but yeah, it really hit my mom hard, and then my brother as well. So grew up around that.
Right, which is sort of the focus, or the main sort of focus of Driven, your memoir, right?
Yeah.
He plays such a huge role.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't know what else I wanted to say about that, but I did, you know, in that poem, of course, it jumped out at me again, and I thought, well, that's another reason why we have a lot, I think, in common, both as writers and people.
I think a certain level of accessibility, too. I mean, when I first read your work, it did feel like I was finding a friend that I hadn't, I think I'd seen you read, but once I read your work on the page, we hadn't really talked or met much, and definitely felt a kinship. I think it's the narrative focus. I think it's something about the, for lack of a better phrase, more working class roots, and, you know, this thing, two things that as I came up as a poet were treated, I felt, as kind of negatives, were being somewhat confessional and accessible. You should be like Wallace Stevens. You should be really removed and inaccessible because then you're smart and difficult. But I always love that accessibility, and I love it in your work. I just want to know what the deal is.
And you know, what I guess my reaction, I don't know about you, but it pissed me off.
Oh yeah.
And so that's just, you know, and like what happens when you piss a kid off is he just does it more, right? Push the buttons more. So it's like, I can be more irreverent than that. Watch me now, you know, that kind of thing. And so maybe that has played more of a hand because of all that in what I wound up spewing out. Yeah.
I definitely have a certain level of attitude, and some of my work too that's a little like, oh yeah, you don't like this kind of poetry, or the revealing or the tackling of real things. I mean, on some level, it would be a great relief for me personally if I like to sit down and write, you know, just abstract poems about an owl and a couple birch trees.
Right.
I can give me Mary Oliver any day, but I just don't write like that.
Right. You know, and well, in this poem, for example, I mean, you know, you're writing in that narrative, and we're all right there in this whole equinox description of the what's going, and then you got the grizzly bear. The bear shows up in the end, and it does do that. He does give us a little Wallace Stevens escape in a poetic sort of way, and I like that. I like those kinds of things. I mean, I think that invites an audience in. I like work like that invites me in, and then does something, and you know, takes me away.
You're grounded. You have a little context before you.
Right. Get a little carried away.
Yeah. And I do have a few poems that tackle dreams, and that's one thing I was told as well, don't ever write about dreams. Totally. And I don't do it all the time as a prep, but sometimes the bear that I dreamt about suddenly is relevant to the poem, and it's like, okay, he's showing up.
Which makes me think that you should read the buffalo poem.
Oh, yeah, I could do that.
Yeah. Since we're into dreams, you can blame this one on your dog.
Yeah, this one breaks that rule for sure. I'm just skirting it by writing about someone else's dream, which might even be worse somehow. It's not even my own dream.
Yeah, but you're a poet.
Yeah, this one, that's right. I will say, too, I felt a lot more permission as a poet to write about my personal life. There's something about memoir. You tell someone you're writing a memoir and they're like, okay, has it been vetted by legal?
Right.
You're really attesting to and taking responsibility for all these events, and yeah, sure.
Right.
I have no problem with that.
Right.
I've chosen to write about something that happened to me. In poems, you still have the same kind of freedom you might have in song lyrics or something like that, where you could write a whole poem and say, oh no, that was a persona poem. That wasn't even my story.
There are no rules.
Yeah. So coming to creative nonfiction after starting as a poet, it was kind of like, oh, people are acting like this is such a brave thing, or making comments like, wow, you really put a lot out there, which doesn't feel great. When you hear that, it's like, oh, am I undressed? I suddenly feel like I've shown up naked in someone else's dream.
And that's I guess that's part of what I like about, I think what I like about your work is, and because I mean, I feel like a Claude in the way that you know, like, don't tell her a secret. Because she's good, you know, she says everything. You know, it just comes out of her mouth, and so it's like, yeah, because that's why not?
Yeah.
I mean, what are we hiding, or what are we holding back? You know, on,
Yeah.
And so I think that that comes out in your work. Seems like to me, but
Yeah. I try
whether it's true or not.
I try to stick to the things that I feel like are my stories to tell, or in the case of this dream poem, it's such a small snippet of who my daughter is, and one of my little internal litmus test is, if she reads this when she's 25, would she feel seen, respected, and loved?
Yeah, there you go.
And not overly revealed.
Right.
It's the trap of parenting, right? If we can't write about the experience of parenting, it's a gap or a black hole, and other people can't see themselves reflected there and have relief from their anxieties and shames and fears.
Because the reasons we write.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if we can't reach a whole group or write about a whole experience, that's problematic. So I always try to find my best way to write about the things that are important to me. My daughter dreams of buffalo. This morning, the day before Valentine's, I say, "Hun, would you like some bacon?" To which she says no, an animal lover. Then begins her story with, "I dreamed about buffalo." A whole herd gone astray, surrounding a village with a children's hospital and a rodeo ring. And through a series of complicated events, she saves everyone. Last night she rattled on late, explaining how she prefers a bed with drawers underneath, so she knows there's no killer lurking below. Like in some story she read about a man with a knife who hid under a girl's bed and cut through the mattress to reach her, asleep above, and stab her in the back, dead. Must have been a sound sleeper, I said, to which she replied, yeah, and I want a window in my bedroom that isn't stuck shut so I can escape. Then she told me to order a fire ladder for my second-story bedroom, in case. Last spring, I dated a first-generation Mexican-American man who said, "The problem with white people is you have no culture," to which I said, yeah, envying him his language and heritage and lack of responsibility for this giant grief, this genocidal disaster. My daughter, a fifth-generation Montanan, will tell you our home sits on land where the Salish, Kootenai, Blackfeet, Shoshone, and Pend Oreille tribes once roamed. She knows that history better than we know the rest. Her paternal side imported from penal colonies in Australia. On my side, one line from Denmark, the other too poor to trace back before the Great Depression in Indiana, my home state. Translation, Indian land. In the kitchen this morning, I don't ask out loud why my daughter spends her dreams fighting for life, nor do I say, if inherited trauma embeds itself in our DNA like memory, maybe the buffalo dream of nice little white girls and the men who hide beneath them come to backstab the world to death again.
All right. That's great. I mean, there's so many different things going on, and that's a great way. It's a great ending image.
I love
Wrap that
endings.
baby all
Yeah.
up, you know.
If I can't find the ending, I just move on.
Yeah.
But that one, you know, it's satisfying sometimes when you're throwing the puzzle pieces out there,
Right.
but you don't really know how they fit together.
Right.
I'm just
how
trusting
how
that
they may
might.
come together.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
by
Right.
golly, it did.
Yes, that's always a good
And the
feeling.
piece fits.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. What else? Anything else you want to pop out with, or off the top of your head? As you said earlier, the one manuscript, the one that I saw, the After Mating for Life,
Yeah.
or whatever, which was is not something you're shopping around right now. You're just focused more on the memoir.
Yeah, that's the hard thing about writing in multiple genres is I do want to see that collection in print one day.
Right.
I would like to give it a little more attention. I would like to put in some new poems
Sure.
and maybe pull some other ones and reorganize.
Right.
But when you're working on a book-length project, it's like, well, and I have very limited time between the full-time day job. I mean, that's one thing that happened when I accepted the full-time job is, you know, we're not dirt poor anymore, but I am time poor.
Yeah.
So in my mind, as soon as I get this memoir out of my hands to a reader, and I've got a couple months, I'd love to spend that on the poems, and I would really like to get that book into the world.
Right. I mean, one of the things that's striking about that manuscript, the way it was anyway when I read it, it was this perspective or the point of view or the existence of a single mom. You know.
Yeah.
And all the, I mean, that in itself is just worth the effort of having that book in the world, you know.
It's one of the reasons it's important to me. There's a
Yeah.
reason why we don't have a lot of creative works written from, you know, the trenches of full-time single parenting, and 80% of, I think last census, like 80% of single parent homes were run by mothers.
Totally.
Because you are time poor, probably poor, and life is so busy.
Right.
So when we can get those stories out there, I think they're important ones.
Yeah. I remember in like an old, remember there was a short story, I think it was a short story, I don't think it was a novella, but it was a long short story, and I'm trying, who wrote it? But it was the title, the name of it was I Stand Here Ironing.
Oh, Tilly Olson.
Tilly
Yeah.
Olson.
Yeah.
Yeah, what a great piece of work that is, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, from a feminine point of view. And that written back in the early 20th century. Yeah. During the Depression, maybe, or
I
just
think
after?
so. I wanted to say 30s,
30s
or so.
or 40s.
I recently bought that, or during the pandemic, because of the book-length memoir project I'm working on is all about my first couple years of solo parenting, and so I went back and bought some Tilly Olson and Adrienne Rich and some early voices on solo mothering, and
Right.
yeah.
All right. So what else, Mark? I didn't make notes.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
You're prolific.
Yeah, well, not in the last week or so. So if
that
a
you
week goes
measure it
by,
by the
it like
week.
drives me crazy. Yeah.
Other people would be like, oh, I haven't written a poem for a year, but
Well, that's not prolific. Yeah.
no. Do you revise much?
Depends.
Yeah.
You know, it's like sometimes hardly at all anymore, and I think that just has to do with getting older and doing it a lot, maybe.
Yeah.
And and you know, and you mentioned Harrison and talking about, you know, you should learn how to write prose to make a living for yourself. I've said this many times in this business, this episodes that because I read it in something that he wrote. And that was that, you know, he talked about being a poet first because poetry comes from the gods, and when they aren't talking, he writes other things because he's a writer.
Yeah.
And that's, I've been lucky in a way that I felt like whatever the chatter may be, I needed to write it down.
Yeah.
And but now I forgot what your question was.
How much
even.
you revise, what
Oh,
your
yeah.
relationship is like with revision.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to, you know, the other day, at this stage of the game, I started on Facebook. I got tired of submitting stuff. And so I just started putting stuff out on Facebook. I've been doing that for over 15 years or something like that now. That's my publishing technique. I don't give it at this point, you know. And, but I wrote something. I didn't do anything for Valentine's Day, and my wife's birthday was a week before that. And it's like we just been through this shit show of a year, going through 2 or 3 moves.
You're moving again.
And Pam has been sick, and she broke her ankle, and it's just been an absolute goddamn nightmare. We had COVID together on my birthday. So all of that, you know, this little universe that I'm spinning for myself, I decided I'll write her a poem for Valentine's Day. And of course I did, and it was a direct address kind of a thing, and it was just a hokey sort of, and it would have been fine if I just gave it to her and she put it in a drawer or threw it away, as we throw everything away at some point. But you know, I'm so compulsive.
Yeah.
You know, once you do something, you think, well, then this has got to be better than that. This sucks. It stinks. So, I mean, I spent a whole lot of time, weeks, I guess you might say, on that thing, over and over again, going back to it, to finally to where I felt like it was a poem that could stand on its own as a poem instead of what I'd done initially. So sometimes things get a hold of me and I can't let go of them, but usually it's just like, it's not too much, and maybe, you know, maybe a few days of rereading and revisions. I think about the paper I waste, because I got to print everything out. You know, we're all on the computer now, the great editing board.
And do you type on computer, then print it out, and then?
Yeah, I'm gonna like write by hand, and then I type it into the computer, and then I got to print stuff out to look at it on. And so I waste a lot of paper. I turn it over and waste it again. I mean, but I still go through a lot of those kinds of things, and but you know, sometimes it's just a word, and you think, wow, what a waste. You're wasting paper for one frickin' word.
But it wasn't the right word.
It wasn't the right word, no. And you know, maybe 2 months from now, you might change it again. Even though I don't do too much of that anymore, go back too far, you know. It's like, it's all in the rear view mirror at some point. Yeah. Especially, particularly as the clock ticks. Everything behind gets less and less important, you know. The present's all that matters, right?
Yeah.
I mean, more so all the time. That's the way it is in my mind.
Yeah, I think more about like putting these poems in a collection or something. As a younger person, it would be like, oh, once the poems are good enough, or once my writing is good enough, surely publishing is a meritocracy, and by some miracle, the writing will reach a certain level and it will just turn into a book. And then the more you know amazing creative people, the older you get, the more you see how publishing does and does not work. The sense is, if I want these poems to be available in the future beyond me, and I want to know what they're going to be like on the page, I want to have control over that, I better make sure that it happens. Otherwise they'll, you know, disappear in my computer files and stacks of folders of random paper with different versions. So if you want to curate something, that's something I've seen come with age for me. Then I better do it myself. Right.
And because we love to read, and because we have this great catalog right through these doors back out into the main library of all the stuff that's there, we believe that's important. And at a certain point, it probably isn't. I mean, it's all going to be dust.
Oh, yeah.
We're all, and you look in the sky at night and it's like, what the hell are we doing? Spinning on our little heads, you know, doing all this stuff. But it's entertainment. And you know, it will last for a few generations, you know, for your kids and for people after. And it is a marker of a place in time. at least on the temporary scale of humanity.
Yeah.
You know, it is that that time frame. I was talking to James about. He was talking about. He wants to move back up here. He thinks, you know, his kids like it up here, and he's down in Arizona. But so he was talking about, you know, looking for places up here, which of course is, yeah. Well, we know what that's like. It's insane. But he was thinking, you know, he was talking about all the people that he thought of that he knew here back when he was here in the late 90s or the mid 90s for grad school, and the community of of writers that still exist in this place, and how he wanted to, you know, kind of get back into that and be a part of that, or a part of that as a tradition, and join that whole thing. And I thought, yeah, that's one of the things when I finally got back here, we moved down here in '98. I really didn't want to leave just because of that.
Yeah.
And then I would meet new people.
Yeah.
You know, and it was because there was this magnet of artistic whatever. You know, I mean, a lot of people, you know, think we're a bunch of, you know, snob assholes in Missoula. You know, it's like, oh, Missoula, oh, they're so goddamn important. But it's not like that. I don't think it is. For me, it's great.
I mean, you compare it to other literary cultures, and it's very down to earth.
Low
That's my,
keyed.
yeah.
Yeah.
People are
exactly.
approachable, and I like that. And even my first go around in the mid to late 90s, one cool thing about the creative writing program here was that as an undergraduate, you could overlap in the graduate workshops.
Right.
And so a lot of the people who were grad students at the time are familiar to me, and I would be a quiet young kid, not even old enough to drink, at the back of the Old Post readings. I remember seeing Carolyn Patterson read, pregnant with her now, you know, one of her now grown children.
Right.
And I didn't realize until you told the story at a reading recently that you had overlapped with Hugo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in high school, James Welch.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
That was, you know, I didn't know anything about him other than he was pretty cool, and he wrote great stuff. Recently spoke to David Axelrod, and he was talking about teaching that collection of Welch's poetry recently, the Riding the Earth Boy for me, and how impressed he was with it. He read a poem, an early poem that he read, and it had so much Hugo influence, you know, that whole that you may come here someday on a whim, say your life broke down, you know, that whole routine. Yeah.
Yeah, right. We learn by imitating and
Yeah,
hope
totally.
that whatever comes out of us couldn't possibly sound exactly like someone else, but you can see the fingerprints, and then we hope to outgrow that and step into our
once
own.
you get away from that shadow and you get away from, you know, the program or whatever it was, you're bound to find your own way if you're going to keep scribbling. I would think.
Yeah.
Maybe some people don't. I don't know. I mean, I don't pay attention to all the people that went through here, but yeah. What else? You want to read us another poem? We've got to squeeze in as many as possible.
All right. I don't think I have it with me, but it's in the collection. I had a poem about going to a planetarium and realizing we're all specks of dust.
Oh, cool. I like that idea.
But I don't think that one is with me.
Oh.
I'm just making sure. I know, that's why I need them in a book, right? So I
Totally.
have them all, and I know what pages they're on, and I can find them easily. Well, I'll just take us to a different place. I had the interesting experience of living in Texas for 10 years, and I'm so glad I got out and I don't miss it. There's a lot that I loved about Texas.
Yeah.
And this is one of the few poems I've written that takes place in Texas. It does feel like Driven in microcosm, because Driven, the memoir, is structured around cars, and this is one of the cars that's in the book. Christmas came to Texas on a Friday that year, and we got caught in an argument about the carburetor. All our rides so far fuel injected. How little we knew, but my brother had died and left us, a quarter-ton behemoth, that only ran when the weather was good, or my mood clear, or the stars of Leo overhead. Too much gas, I said. Too little, you argued. You see, the carb primes it, no distributor or spark plugs, dated technology, but like anything, it will work if you know how to work it. Can't you smell gas, I insisted. I was to write what dog is to master. So I kept going, believing my word gospel. Honestly, I got kind of mean about it. And I'd apologize now, 15 years later, but we divorced 5 years back, 9 years after the Ford's engine seized. So let me just say, I was right about the carburetor. Once we waited, that old red Ford started up, and I drove victory laps around the neighborhood while mariachi music played for Jesus' birthday, colored lights everywhere, and I felt no joy because I was wrong about resurrection, dreaming myself some kind of savior. For the record, a truck is not a sleigh, not a body.
All right. Yeah, that's another thing about the work is you know your way around a wrench.
A little bit. A blessing and curse. Small hands are really good for getting into places in cars
totally.
that others can't reach.
Yeah.
But the brute force for the torque, I
Right.
might need a little hand sometimes.
Right,
Yeah.
right, there you go. Well, we're getting close to the end of our time. I knew that was going to go fast. It's been a pleasure. Anything else you want to say before we're out of here?
No, it's been wonderful reading poems and
Hanging out again.
a great excuse to catch up with you. And thank you so much for having me.
You bet. And if you have to pick up Driven by Melissa Stephenson if you haven't read a good memoir lately, and whatever the next one may be, and maybe a collection of poems one of these days. And next time we'll be visiting with another poet in Montana. See you then. Bye.
Got a lifetime filled